In the vast emptiness of space, a small ship called the Forward Glaive was on a mission. The captain of the ship, a brave man named Dan, and his team of skilled crew members were exploring a new area. They were the first ones to be there, and their job was to make sure everything was safe for the colony ships that would come after them. One day, as they were going about their work, something unexpected happened. They saw another ship in the distance. It was much bigger than their own ship and looked very different. Dan and his team were surprised because they thought they were the only ones there. The other ship came closer, and soon a voice came through on their communication system. It was the captain of the other ship, but he didn't sound friendly at all. His voice was rough and mean, like he was angry at them for being there. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" the other captain asked in a harsh tone. Dan tried to be polite and explained who they were and what their mission was, but the other captain just laughed at him, saying that their little ship was no match for his powerful one. This made Dan worried. He knew that if the other ship decided to attack them, they would be in big trouble. Their ship, the Forward Glaive, was small and not very strong compared to this new threat. Dan turned to his team and told them to be ready for anything. He didn't know what the other captain wanted or why he was being so unfriendly, but he had a bad feeling about it. As the other ship came even closer, Dan could see just how big and intimidating it was. It was like a giant monster looming over them, ready to strike at any moment. The other captain spoke again, his voice dripping with menace. "You have no business being here," he growled. "This is our territory, and we don't like trespassers." Dan's heart was racing, but he tried to stay calm. He knew he had to protect his crew and their mission, no matter what. He took a deep breath and replied, "We don't want any trouble. We're just here to do our job and make sure it's safe for others who will come after us." But the other captain wasn't interested in listening. He just laughed again, a cold and cruel sound that sent shivers down Dan's spine. "You humans and your puny ships," he sneered. "You think you can just go anywhere you want in the universe? Well, let me tell you something. You're not welcome here, and if you don't leave now, we'll make you regret it." Dan's mind was racing, trying to think of a way out of this situation. He looked around at his crew, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. They were all counting on him to keep them safe and get them back home. He knew he had to be strong for them, even though he was just as scared as they were. He straightened his shoulders and looked the other captain right in the eye, even though he could only see him on a screen. "We're not looking for a fight," Dan said firmly, "but we won't be bullied into leaving either. We have a right to be here, and we're not going anywhere until our mission is complete." The other captain's face twisted into an ugly scowl. "Then you'll die here," he snarled. "You and your pathetic little crew. We'll crush you like the insects you are." With that, the screen went dark, and Dan knew they were in for the fight of their lives. He turned to his crew, his voice steady and determined. "All right, everyone," he said. "We knew this mission wouldn't be easy, but we didn't expect this. But we're not giving up. We're going to stand our ground and show them what we're made of. We're the Forward Glaive, and we don't back down from a challenge." His words seemed to give the crew new courage. They nodded and murmured their agreement, ready to face whatever came next. Dan took his place in the captain's chair, his hands gripping the controls tightly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. They would fight until their last breath to protect each other and complete their mission. No matter what happened, they would never surrender. As the other ship began to move towards them, weapons at the ready, Dan took a deep breath and prepared for the battle ahead. It was going to be the toughest fight of their lives, but he knew they could do it. They had to. The fate of the colonies and all the people counting on them depended on it. The alien ship wasted no time in launching its attack on the Forward Glaive. Bright beams of energy shot out from its weapons, hitting the small human ship with tremendous force. The Forward Glaive shook violently, and alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Dan gripped the arms of his captain's chair tightly as he shouted orders to his crew. Evasive maneuvers. Get our shields up and return fire. The crew scrambled to obey, their fingers flying over the controls as they tried to keep the ship from being torn apart. But it was clear that they were outmatched. The alien ship was too big, too powerful, and its weapons were far more advanced than anything the forward glaive had. Explosions rocked the ship, and sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the bridge into darkness. The only illumination came from the flashes of enemy fire outside the windows. Shields are failing. One of the crew members cried out. We can't take much more of this. Dan knew they had to do something fast, or they were all going to die. He looked at the readouts on his screen, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, he had an idea. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Head for the planet, he shouted. We're going to try to lose them in the atmosphere. The pilot nodded and steered the ship towards the nearby planet. It was a dangerous move, entering a planet's atmosphere at such high speeds, but it was better than being sitting ducks in space. As they approached the planet, the alien ship continued to fire on them. The forward glaive's hull was starting to come apart, and the ship was shaking so badly that it was hard to stay in their seats. But then, something unexpected happened. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the alien ship's weapons seemed to lose some of their power. The beams of energy dissipated in the thicker air, and the forward glaive's shields started to hold. It's working, Dan shouted. Keep going. The pilot pushed the ship deeper into the atmosphere, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and their attacker. But the alien ship wasn't giving up. It followed them down, still firing, still trying to destroy them. The forward glaive was in bad shape. Smoke was filling the bridge, and the damage reports were coming in from all over the ship. They had lost engines, weapons, and life support was failing in several sections. But still, they kept going. They knew that if they could just reach the surface of the planet, they might have a chance. They could try to hide, to repair their ship, to find a way to fight back. As they hurtled towards the ground, the alien ship suddenly broke off its attack. It pulled up and away, disappearing back into space. For a moment, Dan and his crew were confused. Why had it stopped firing? But then they realized the terrible truth. The alien ship didn't need to destroy them anymore. The damage had already been done. The forward glaive was coming apart at the seams, and they were going to crash. Dan shouted for everyone to brace for impact, but it was too late. The ship hit the ground with a tremendous force, skidding and bouncing across the rocky surface. Metal screamed and tore, and the crew were thrown about like rag dolls. When it was finally over, the forward glaive was a smoking ruin. It lay in pieces across the barren landscape, a twisted monument to the battle they had just fought. Dan pulled himself from the wreckage, his body battered and bruised. He looked around, trying to find his crew. Some were moving, crawling out of the debris. Others lay still, unmoving. He stumbled over to the nearest survivor, helping them to their feet. They looked at each other, shocked and horrified by what had just happened. But even in that moment of despair, Dan knew they couldn't give up. They were still alive, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, they had to keep fighting. He looked up at the sky, where the alien ship had disappeared. He knew it would be back, and they had to be ready. They had to find a way to survive, to fight another day. It was going to be the hardest thing they had ever done, but they had no choice. They were the last hope for the colonies, for all the people counting on them. And so, with grim determination, Dan and his remaining crew set to work, salvaging what they could from the wreckage and preparing for the long, hard road ahead. Days turned into weeks as Dan and his surviving crew members worked tirelessly to rebuild their ship and heal from their injuries. The crash had left them all battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally. They had lost friends and colleagues, and the weight of their mission seemed heavier than ever. But despite the hardships, they refused to give up. They knew that the colony ships were still on their way, unaware of the danger that awaited them. If the alien ship was still out there, it could easily destroy the defenseless colony vessels. The crew of the forward glaive were the only ones who could warn them, the only ones who could save them. As they worked, they talked about what had happened, trying to make sense of it all. They had never encountered a ship like the one that had attacked them. It was far more advanced than anything they had ever seen, and its captain had spoken of humans with such disdain and hostility. Dan listened to his crew's concerns, sharing their worries but also trying to keep their spirits up. He knew that they looked to him for leadership, for guidance, and he couldn't let them down. One evening, as they sat around a campfire, eating the meager rations they had salvaged from the ship, Dan stood up to address them all. "I know things look bad," he said, his voice steady and strong. "We've been through hell, and we've lost a lot, but we can't give up now. Not when so many people are counting on us." He looked around at their faces, seeing the exhaustion and the fear, but also the glimmer of hope in their eyes. "Those colony ships are still out there," he continued, "still heading towards this system, towards the danger we've discovered. We're the only ones who can save them. We have to get our ship fixed, and we have to find a way to stop that alien vessel before it's too late." The crew nodded, murmuring their agreement. They knew he was right. They had a responsibility, a duty to protect the innocent lives that were heading their way. Over the next few days, they redoubled their efforts. They worked around the clock, repairing the damage to the forward glaive, scavenging parts from the wreckage and the surrounding landscape. It was hard work, and there were times when they wanted to give up. Times when the task seemed impossible, when their injuries ached and their hearts were heavy with grief. But every time they faltered, Dan was there to encourage them. He worked alongside them, never asking them to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. He listened to their ideas, their suggestions, and together they found solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable. Slowly but surely, the forward glaive began to take shape again. It was a patchwork vessel now, cobbled together from the wreckage and whatever they could find. But it was starting to look like a ship again, starting to give them hope that they could actually do this. As the repairs neared completion, Dan called the crew together once more. He looked at them all, seeing the determination in their eyes, the readiness to face whatever lay ahead. "You've all done an incredible job," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I couldn't ask for a better crew, a better team. Together, we're going to finish what we started. We're going to find that alien ship, and we're going to stop it. For the colonies, for the people we've lost, and for ourselves." The crew cheered, their voices ringing out across the barren landscape. They were ready to take the fight to the enemy, ready to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In that moment, they were no longer just survivors of a terrible battle. They were warriors, united in a common cause, bound together by the trials they had faced and the challenges still to come. As the forward glaive lifted off from the planet's surface, its engines roaring to life, Dan felt a sense of purpose filling his heart. They had been through so much, had lost so much, but they were still here, still fighting. And as long as they had each other, as long as they had the courage and the determination to stand up for what was right, he knew that nothing could stop them. They were the crew of the forward glaive, and they would not rest until their mission was complete, until the colonies were safe and the alien threat was destroyed once and for all. With the forward glaive repaired and ready for action, Dan and his crew set out to find a way to stop the alien ship before it could threaten the incoming colony vessels. They knew they were up against a formidable enemy with technology far superior to their own. But they also knew that they had something the aliens didn't: the determination and ingenuity of the human spirit. As they flew through space, they brainstormed ideas, trying to come up with a plan that would give them a fighting chance. They analyzed the data they had gathered during their previous encounter with the alien ship, looking for any weaknesses they could exploit. It was during one of these discussions that Sarah, The young gunner, who had been injured in the crash, spoke up. "What if we could turn their own weapons against them?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. Dan and the others looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" he asked. Sarah explained that during the battle, she had noticed that the alien ship's weapons seemed to be powered by a unique energy source. If they could find a way to disrupt or overload that energy source, it could potentially disable the alien ship's entire weapons system. The crew listened, their eyes widening as they realized the potential of Sarah's idea. It was a long shot, but it was the best plan they had. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to modify the forward glaive systems. They added new sensors and scanners, designed to detect and analyze the alien ship's energy signature. They also modified their own weapons, hoping to find a way to pierce the alien ship's defenses. It was a daunting task, and there were times when they doubted whether they could pull it off. But Dan refused to let them give up. He pushed them to keep going, to keep trying, no matter how many setbacks they faced. Finally, after countless hours of work, they were ready. The forward glaive was no longer the same ship it had been before. It was a patchwork of old and new technology, a testament to the crew's determination and resourcefulness. As they prepared to set out in search of the alien ship, Dan gathered the crew together one last time. He looked at each of them in turn, seeing the courage and resolve in their eyes. "I know we're up against a tough enemy," he said, "but I also know that we have something they don't. We have each other. We have the strength and the will to fight for what we believe in. And that's why we're going to win." The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks they were taking, knew that they might not all make it back, but they also knew that they had to try for the sake of the colonies and for the memory of those they had lost. As the forward glaive set out into space, Dan felt a sense of pride and purpose filling his heart. They were no longer just a crew of explorers and scientists. They were warriors, fighting for the survival of their people. Days turned into weeks as they searched for the alien ship, following the faint energy trail left by its weapons. They encountered other dangers along the way, from asteroid fields to hostile alien races, but they faced each challenge head-on, their modified ship and their newfound skills proving more than a match for anything the universe could throw at them. And then, finally, they found it. The alien ship loomed before them, its weapons already powering up to attack. But this time, the forward glaive was ready. Sarah's modifications worked perfectly, allowing them to detect and analyze the alien ship's energy signature. And when they fired their own weapons, modified to emit a matching frequency, the effect was devastating. The alien ship's defenses crumbled, its weapons faltering as the energy feedback overloaded its systems. The forward glaive pressed its advantage, firing again and again until the alien vessel was nothing more than a drifting wreck. As the crew celebrated their victory, Dan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defeated a superior enemy and saved countless lives. But he knew that their mission was not over yet. The colony ships were still on their way, and there could be other dangers lurking in the depths of space. For now, though, they could take a moment to savor their triumph, to honor the sacrifices they had made and the bonds they had forged in the heat of battle. They were the crew of the forward glaive, and they had proven that nothing could stand in the way of the human spirit when it was united in a common cause. 6 months had passed since the crew of the forward glaive had defeated the alien ship. In that time, they had worked tirelessly to prepare for the arrival of the colony ships. They knew that their victory had bought them some time, but they couldn't be sure that the aliens wouldn't return. Dan had led his crew in fortifying their position on the planet, setting up defenses and early warning systems. They had also been in constant communication with the incoming colony ships, warning them of the potential danger and coordinating their arrival. Now, as the colony ships entered the system, the crew of the forward glaive knew that their moment of truth had arrived. They had to be ready for anything, had to be prepared to defend the colonists with their lives. As the ships approached the planet, Dan stood on the bridge of the forward glaive, his eyes fixed on the screens before him. He watched as the massive vessels, filled with thousands of hopeful colonists, began their descent to the surface. Beside him, his crew were tense and alert, their hands hovering over their controls. They knew that the next few hours would be critical, that any mistake could cost countless lives. But as the first colony ship touched down safely, a cheer went up from the crew. They had done it. They had secured the planet and ensured the safety of the colonists. Over the next few days, the crew of the forward glaive worked alongside the colonists, helping them to set up their new homes and infrastructure. It was a time of joy and celebration, as the dreamers of a new life on a new world finally saw their hopes become reality. But Dan knew that their work was not done. He called his crew together, his face serious as he addressed them. "You've all done an incredible job," he said. "Thanks to your bravery and sacrifice, these colonists have a chance at a new life. But we can't let our guard down. The aliens are still out there, and they may come back. We have to be ready." The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew that Dan was right, that their mission was far from over. In the weeks and months that followed, the crew of the forward glaive continued to patrol the system. Keeping a watchful eye out for any sign of the aliens, they worked with the colonists to build up their defenses, sharing their knowledge and experience. And as the colony grew and thrived, the crew of the forward glaive became more than just defenders. They became friends, mentors, and leaders. They were the guardians of this new world, the protectors of the innocent. Years passed, and the colony became a thriving metropolis. Children were born, families grew, and a new generation began to take shape. And through it all, the crew of the forward glaive remained vigilant. They knew that the aliens were still out there, knew that the danger had not passed, but they also knew that they had something worth fighting for. They had each other, and they had the courage and determination to stand up for what was right. As Dan looked out over the colony he had helped to build, he felt a sense of pride and purpose filling his heart. They had come so far, had overcome so much, and he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what dangers they might face, they would face them together. For they were more than just a crew, more than just defenders. They were a family, bound together by the trials they had faced and the love they shared. And as long as they had each other, as long as they had the strength and the will to fight for what they believed in, nothing could stand in their way. The story of the forward glaive and its crew would be told for generations to come. It would be a story of hope and courage, of sacrifice and triumph. And it would be a reminder to all who heard it that even in the darkest of times, even against the most impossible of odds, the human spirit could never be broken. For as long as there were those who stood up for what was right, as long as there were those who fought for the innocent and the defenseless, there would always be hope. And the crew of the forward glaive would always be there, ready to answer the call, ready to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. They were the guardians of the stars, the protectors of the innocent, and their legend would live on forever.